Jay Franze, welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to have this conversation with you today. We've been preparing for this episode for a while, and you have an interesting background. I'll get into that a little bit more here in a moment when I read your bio, but you've been a leader in the security industry, in the music industry. And so we're going to focus our conversation today on leadership and career development generally, but also specifically within those industries and your experience in relation to those. As we get started today, I just wanted to share Jay's bio with everybody. Born and raised in a suburb of Boston, Jay spent his early years building his passion for leadership development with a focus on the entertainment industry. After graduating from college, Jay moved to Nashville to work in Music City, building a name for himself during his 25 plus years as a leader in the industry. Jay is an author, speaker, coach with a passion for leadership development. His coaching focuses on branding and development, leading people and teams to reach their maximum potential through strategic coaching. Jay is an advisory council member for Harvard Business Review, an advisory board member at Rutgers University, and a 2020-2021 inductee of Marquis Who's Who in America. He is also the host of Franze and Friends, where leaders share their secrets. Jay is the vice president of the Northern California market and the vice president of strategic account operations at G4S Secure Solutions, specializing in integrated security solutions that mitigate risk and add value. Their suite of products and services include risk consulting, software and technology, systems integration, and security officers. Jay has written 3 books and countless articles. His latest book, Leadership: Lessons from the Field, is a collection of blog posts that turn managers into leaders through lessons Jay has learned from his time spent in the field. Jay currently lives outside of San Francisco with his lovely wife, Jennifer, his 2 beautiful daughters, Bella and Lucy, and their 2 dogs, Charlie and Zoe. What a wonderful background. And I'm particular to both the children and the dogs. I have 6 children myself, and I have 2 dogs, and they are such a joy. Jay, welcome to the podcast. Anything else you would like to share by way of background or personal context before we really dive on in?
You know what? What you read is going to be hard enough to live up to. So, and as far as the kids and the dogs go, you just let me know your address and I'll ship them to you.
Yeah, they're a lot of work, but a lot of fun as well. Well, great. I thought as we really get started, perhaps you could lay a little bit of the groundwork for the conversation by sharing with us a little bit about your 25 plus years in the music industry. That again is kind of unique. I'm trying to remember. I've interviewed, a couple hundred people for the podcast. I don't think I've interviewed anyone previously that had leadership roles in the music industry. So tell us about how that happened, how you got into that, and then we can go from there.
Sure. No, it's definitely a unique path, right? So I started young. It was probably just like anybody else in high school that I wanted a way to make the girls interested. So I was playing in bands and working as a musician, playing in the local clubs and things like that. I really enjoyed it. I really liked music, but I wasn't good at it. So what I did was I became the person who was technically inclined. So I was running the gear, and I was setting up for the shows and recording and doing everything I could like that. And I really liked it. So I wanted to pursue that. But when I told my parents I wanted to pursue that, my father looked at me and said, you know what, we'll support that, but you have to have a backup plan. Because at the time, there wasn't even audio schools or things like that you could go to at the time. So I did. I went to business school, and I'm glad I did. And then after that, they shipped me off to Ohio, where there was this first sign of a school, and they were putting together a program. So I went through their program. And when I came back, I came back, high and mighty. I was all good and ready to go, thinking, okay, I had this piece of paper from the school that says I'm a certified audio engineer. So I went around to all 2 of the studios that were in my neighborhood, and they said, yeah, okay, great. We'll hire you as a freelance engineer. And I thought to myself, I didn't know what freelance meant at the time. So I thought, this is awesome. I just went to school. I got out. I have a job. See that? It all worked out. But it, as we all know now, that freelance is not what you would think. So after years of cutting my teeth and, learning what to do and so forth, I worked during the daylight hours at one studio, and we were recording books on tape. It was very exciting, but we were recording books on tape. And then literally that same day, I would walk across the street to the other studio at night and we would record rock bands. So I really enjoyed it, really liked it. And then I eventually moved to New York and continued doing it, opened up my own facility and really enjoyed it. But I wanted to take it to the next level. And one day I was sitting around my dining room table and I was holding a Shania Twain CD in my hand. I'll never forget that moment. I was holding this Shania Twain CD and I was looking at the credits, and there was the engineer on the credits was Bob Bullock. And I said, okay, Bob Bullock is in Nashville. So I said, okay, I'm going to go ahead and move to Nashville. I'm going to go teach at the college and I'm going to go work with Bob Bullock. So I hopped in my car and I drove. I was literally gone maybe that next day. And I left my house and it sat there for about a year before I finally sold it. But I moved to Nashville and got an apartment and I went to that school and they looked at me like I was nuts. And they said, that's not the way this works. And again, I had to fight the challenges. But the one thing that I got lucky about, one of the teachers that I studied under in Ohio was now teaching at this college. So he kind of helped me and showed me how I could get into the school and how I could become a teacher. So I did that, and it took about a year's worth of time, but I did it. And then eventually he retired. He was the director of education and he retired, and I took over his spot. So I worked my way into the director role. And it was my job for the students to bring in people from the industry so they could demonstrate their skills. One of the people that came in was Bob Bullock. And I said, okay, great. So I asked the students, who wants to help set up the studio? And nobody wanted to help. I don't know if they had a project going on or something that kept them from wanting to help, but nobody wanted to help. So I went in and I set up the studio on my own. And Bob came in and taught to the students. And then at the end of the session, when all the students left and Bob was cleaning up his belongings and getting ready to leave, I walked him out and I was standing in the lobby of the school and he looked at me and he said, "Who set up the studio today?" And I said, "Well, I did." And he goes, "Wow." He goes, "That's exactly the way I like things set up." He goes, "Would you ever consider coming to work for me?" I mean, it happened, those exact words, just like that. And I said, "Absolutely." So at that moment, I went and worked for Bob, and I did that for about 3 years. And that was my connection to what I consider the real entertainment industry, where I was working on records that you would find in stores and hear on the radio and that type of stuff. So that was my entryway.
Well, that's super interesting, and I applaud you for following your interests and passions, even down an uncertain path. You have more guts than I think a lot of people who get nervous about those sorts of things. I think a lot of people end up going the safe route, and I mean, even as your parents said, have a backup plan. That's not a bad idea. Don't get me wrong. And I teach in a business school, so there's nothing wrong with, getting a business degree as a backup plan. But I do think there's a lot of people that are a little bit too nervous about, following their interests, their dreams, their passions. And so great work there, and the grit and the determination and just the persistence to make it happen. Most things don't come easy in life, and if we want to achieve things, it's not enough just to, go to school and get that degree, or, like you said, you got that certificate, you're ready to go, you've proven yourself. Well, it's not that simple. You have to go out and actually prove yourself in industry. And I think that applies to music industry, to business, to whatever, walk of life that we're talking about. Well, very good. So at some point you make a transition, 25 years plus in the music industry. What caused you to make that transition?
Oh, great. That's a good question. And let me go into it. But before I do, let me just point out, you said it's the grit and everything that goes into hanging in there. And there's two things I'd like to tag onto that. One, I was probably, as they say, young and dumb at the time, because I don't know if I would do that at this moment in life, right? However, it was my passion, and it was something I did. And that overnight success people talk about, where I just had that lucky moment meeting this person in in the school, that was 15 years into it. So it was not something that just happened. It was 15 years of preparation for that moment. And I remember one of the other professionals that came in and spoke at the school, somebody asked him, hey, how did you get your position? You've got, you're one of the highest ranking people in town. And he said, well, it's not that I'm better than anybody else. He goes, there's plenty of people out there who are better than I am. He goes, all that I did is last longer. He said, I just, everyone went off and got married. Everybody wasn't able to live on the salary you could make and so forth. He says, I just outlasted them. So that's how I made it. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. That's where the grit and everything comes into it. But back to your question, how did it transition into the world of security? It was about 11 years ago where the music industry started to take a real hard left turn, where you had all sorts of challenges with people stealing digital music, or the industry unfocused and not knowing where they're going, or technology outpacing the industry where you can record at home and get just the good quality as you could in a recording studio. And in reality, the only things we were using the recording studios for at that time were recording live musicians. Like in Nashville, they still do that to this day, where you get a group of 8 guys in a room and they play all the parts at one time. But then what happens nowadays is they take that hard drive with them and they go home and they record the rest of the parts at home. So the workload for somebody like myself was just cut in half. So you had to start being innovative and finding other ways of working the industry. So what I started to do, where most guys started to go back on the road and started to work as a road musician, I started working more in artist development and putting career paths together for these wannabe artists, and even the more known artists. We book tours and get the tour buses going, and started to make arrangements of how they can get around the country in a more efficient manner to save money, to make the best use of their time. So I was doing that through transportation companies. So I spent a small stint working for a transportation company because when I was doing that, the company said, hey, we like what you're doing. It seems to be working out, and would you consider coming and doing it here? So I did, and we took a transportation company that was very small at the time. It was only like 5 or so vehicles, and we worked it up over a course of a couple of years to 150 vehicles, which included several tour buses and the mini coaches and so forth. And we would also have a series of SUVs and stuff that we would use to transport the artists to like the CMA awards and things like that. So I'm still working with all the people I worked with in the music business, recording their records, but now I'm making the arrangements for them to travel or go to award shows. And as I was doing that, I was also making the arrangements with their security teams, where to pick them up, how to, where we're going to drop them off, how we're going to handle the red carpet, who's going to walk them down, what doors are we going to open. And that led me into a interest in the security side. So that's where I ended up, and that's when I got into more security. And I've been doing that for the past 10 years now.
Yeah, well, that's super interesting. And again, I applaud you for the flexibility and agility, being able to pivot. You highlight industry trends and shifts within the music industry, largely driven by technological advances. And I think outside of the music industry, across the world of work, we see that everywhere. It just looks perhaps a little bit differently, but I think disruption is the name of the game nowadays. And new technologies are definitely shifting and disrupting the way we do our work, the way we interact with each other, the types of tasks that perhaps we previously performed, and now there's programs or there's other software that can handle that for us, or whatever the case may be. In the music industry example, like you said, recording studios at home, where people can do so much of that. And I've actually been quite fascinated. I am by no means, even remotely knowledgeable about the music industry, but, just watching some documentaries and some artists where they, show what they do in their home studios. It's fascinating, right? And the reality is that it's a fairly low barrier to entry even, to get the necessary equipment to be able to put together, really professionally sounding music. I think back, it was maybe 2012. I'll butcher it if I try to remember the names of the two top songs of that year, but both top songs, I think in 2012 were indie type artists and music produced outside of a major label or in a studio. And I just remember being so fascinated by that. Like, wow, now anyone really could do it. Obviously there's a lot of work that goes into making that successful, but again, to the point of your story, the ability to innovate and be adaptive and agile within that disruptive space, I think is really an important lesson. And you were able to pivot into something, that was also needed and valuable, but perhaps a little bit different than what you've been doing before. And now you find yourself doing something completely different. The reality is, I think most of us find our careers to go in a non-linear path. Or at least not a directly linear path. We tend to have zigzags, and it's just the way it is. I think very few people, kind of set out at the beginning of their career, their young adulthood, saying, this is what I'm going to do. And then they just do it for the next, 40 plus years they're in the workforce. And so I think that's a great lesson. The other thing you brought up during that transition is your focus on career development of these artists. And I don't know how much of that had been happening before this transition period in the music industry. But that resonated with me as we were preparing for this episode, because I think career development and leadership development, generally speaking, just in the world of business, the world of work, is such an important topic. And frankly, I think it's something that's often done quite poorly in many organizations. I'm not sure there's enough attention or priority given to developing people and helping them map out their careers and helping them have ownership over their own development, but also as leaders investing our time and energy as leaders into developing our people. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about what your approach has been as you've done leadership and career development coaching and consulting, and some of what you put into your books and those sorts of things.
Sure. No, absolutely. I can tell you, even as early as this morning, I was in the middle of a conversation. We were discussing organizations and how organizations need to be more employee-centric. And when we talk about that, we talk about the employees and how, especially in today's world where there's so many different options for people, that we have to keep people engaged. And if we truly, the world of business is all about metrics. We got to reach hit a certain amount of revenue. We got to, in my world, we got to maintain non-billable overtime, and we got to take care of dark hours, which are hours that somebody requested service and we don't provide it. So there's all sorts of metrics that people have to hit. But for me, it's more about the people. And that started when I was teaching at that college, because I never went to school to be a teacher. I went to, business school. I didn't think I was ever going to be a teacher. I was never certified to be a teacher. I can't even believe they let me teach. And at the time, I thought to myself, this is crazy. I don't know why they're allowing this to happen. But now I can understand, okay, 16 successful years working at that time in the music industry was credibility. But I didn't know that, and I didn't think about that. So in my mind, I was thinking, what can I do to prove myself to my students, if nobody else, that I'm worth learning from? So at that time, I would study up on everything. I would study up on all the technology. I would make sure that if someone came to me and said, how do you record this guitar? I wouldn't just say, well, I put a microphone in front of an amplifier and I hit the red button. I go into describing the frequencies and why this is set up the way it is, and the mechanics in the amplifier, and show them there's more to it than just that. And during that time, I was taking that information and I had like a 2-inch thick notebook, which I eventually turned into a book. And that book was what got the credibility of me teaching. And even when I went to work in studios in Nashville, I would see that book on bookshelves. So to me, I didn't think anything of it. To me, it was just my notes and a way of, me earning my credibility, but I guess it earned credibility in a whole different way. So But to the point of teaching, I never thought of being a teacher, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed standing in front of the classroom and talking to people. But I really enjoyed the time in between the classes when the students would come up to me and ask me for personal advice and guidance and that type of stuff. So that was more important and more valuable. And I have countless stories of helping people and, doing that type of thing. That was much more exciting than saying I was a teacher or that I stood in front of a classroom and got to hear myself speak for, an hour or two or three. And then when I had the opportunity to go work in the organizations that I work in now, they're much, much larger. I mean, the one organization you mentioned at the beginning of the show is the world's largest security company. It's the second largest employer in the world next to Walmart. So there's that many employees that work there. And in my world, I oversee about 1,000 of them, or thousands of them. And my team is a team of managers that are about 8 people. And then they have a team that cascades below them and so forth. And to me, what makes it most exciting and what's most interesting is coaching them and helping them through the things that nobody ever was able to help me through. Never had a formal mentor or anything like that. So I wished I did, and I learned from everybody I met. I never missed an opportunity to learn good or bad from somebody, but I never had that formal person. So I used to talk to the students and then now the employees, and I tell them the things that I wished somebody would have told me. It's really what it comes down to. How can you make it? What are the right things to do, or where are the right places in the organization to make friends or hang out or try to shadow somebody, and what you can learn, and now how you can apply that information to take the next advancement that comes along. So that's really how it started and how it works for me.
Well, you said a whole lot there that I think is really important. Starting with your comment about the focus on people within organizations and employee engagement. And I mean, if as leaders, if our goal is to help the organization be as successful as possible, then we have to step back and ask ourselves, okay, well, how do we achieve that goal? And I suppose there's all these different functional areas within an organization, and there's all these different forms of capital that an organization has at its disposal that it can prioritize and invest into, to try to move things forward. You have the intellectual capital, you have the equipment, you have the property, you have all these different elements of capital. And it's a little mind-blowing to me that so often the human capital piece is, for whatever reason, it ends up kind of low on the priority list, even though it's the people in that organization that are the creative individuals driving the innovations, creating the products and services, and actually doing the work of the organization, interfacing with the customer in order, for the organization to bring value to the marketplace. And so if we don't invest in our people, then we're not going to attract and retain good people. The best people are going to leave, and we are going to struggle to have a competitive advantage in the marketplace. So, I mean, you and I seem to be in sync there, as we're talking about the value of people and engagement. And it does kind of blow my mind. And even though I've been at this for a really long time and I've talked to so many leaders, it blows my mind that there's still, even to this day, when there's so much evidence, to support what we're talking about, the business case for investing in your people, even if you don't buy into the, like, what we might call the warm and fuzzies of HR or people development or leadership, even if it's strictly a selfish, kind of self-interested business case for the success of the organization, we should be investing in our people for all the reasons you just mentioned. And it's also where I find my greatest fulfillment as a leader. So one of the most important roles of a leader is to develop the people around them. And if I'm in a leadership role, I have to be thinking about everyone on my team. How do I help them to maximize their potential? How do I prepare them to take over for me if and when I leave, or take over for another person in the organization who may need to leave at a higher level? And if we're not preparing people in that way, then we're shooting ourselves, our own future success and the success of the business. We're shooting ourselves in the foot. And so perhaps it requires us to take a step back and to just have those conversations as leadership teams, as executive teams on an ongoing basis, to reaffirm our commitment to investing in our people and not just giving lip service to it. Because I think most leaders are going to say, yeah, it's important that we invest in our people, but going beyond the lip service and actually doing it, right? And actually prioritizing it and investing the time, the people, the money into the development of our people.
No, you make some good points there. And I think it's important, like you mentioned, bench strength. That's the key for people to be able to move up. So we can promote from within, and we don't have to go to an outside source for our next group of candidates. And we're constantly building that team. But I think what it comes down to is leadership. If we can't make a solid business case for the leadership team, the stakeholders that are involved in allowing the decisions to happen, if we can't make a good business case for them, they're not going to push that down to the lower levels. So if we can explain to them how turnover has a cost to it. So for every employee we have to onboard, we're looking at, say, $2,500. And if that person turns over within the first 90 days, what good is that? We're churning another person for $2,500 and then maybe another one, and so on and so forth. So if we can make the business case and turn it into a metric that is easily understood from somebody in a senior leadership role, then all of a sudden they might have some stake in the game. They might say, okay, you know what, now you're making some sense. So how do we come up with a solution after that? So that's employee engagement, like you just mentioned. If we keep our employees engaged, then we keep them on board, and now we pass that 90-day mark. And now they're into the point where they're actually earning money for the company versus the company having to invest money into them. So say the first 90 days is all investment, and that's where we break even, the 90-day mark, and that's where we're going to recoup our investment. So from a business point of view, we have to be able to keep that person past 90 days. And every time or every day past that 90-day mark is obviously beneficial for the employee, but now it's also beneficial for the company. And if we can put that on paper or put that in a presentation, put that in front of our stakeholders, then we can come back and say, okay, now we're going to go ahead and invest some time and money into, like you mentioned, HR or the training and the things that we can do to hold engagement levels high for our employees. Because if we can keep the engagement high, that reduces the turnover, that keeps the excitement level going. And then it doesn't just help with the turnover numbers and the metrics. The key thing it helps with is building the team necessary to reach the metrics that you're trying to reach in the first place, whether that be revenue growth or a reduction in overtime or any of the other key metrics that you're supposed to deliver on as a senior leader. This helps all of that. And then the last piece I'll mention on that, because I know it's a little long-winded, is that our frontline employees are the ones we should be turning to for the new innovations, because they're the ones that are doing the work. And if they're the ones doing the work and they encounter a problem, guess who's trying to fix that problem? They are. We're not sitting next to them. So if they're able, if they're making 10 widgets an hour and they found a way to solve a problem with theirs and now they can make 15 an hour, they've just increased your product as well as being more efficient in your business world of metrics. So I think it's important for us to focus on all of the variables and not just get so narrow-minded in tunnel vision to focus on one thing. Because when we do focus on that one thing, we don't see a result right away. And then people say, well, see, I told you that didn't work.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jay, this has really been a fascinating discussion. We are running a little bit short on time, but before we close, I want to make sure I give you a chance to share with listeners how they can get connected with you, find out more about your current work, your book, and anything else that you would like to share by way of last word on the topic for today.
Sure, no, and I appreciate that. My name is Jay Franze. I'm on just about any social media platform out there. It's all at Jay Franze, and you can find them all just by going to jayfranze.com. That's JAYFRANZE.com. And if you do have any interest in things that I jot down on paper, you can read blog articles or find books or anything else you might like.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jay. It has been a real pleasure talking with you. And it's been fascinating to learn just a little bit more of the behind the scenes trajectory of your career in the music industry and moving into the securities industry. But I appreciate your passion for leadership and career development, your passion around people development. I think that's so vital to the successful organizations of the future, particularly in a world that is ever changing. And increasingly, it seems like the rapid pace of disruption that continues to increase. And this year, this past year of COVID and just everything moving remotely is just, one small example. And as massive as it's been, it's just really one small example of all of the coming disruptions that I think are going to be in place. If we're going to be prepared for it, we need to follow your example and others like you who lean into the change, are adaptable and willing to pivot, and who really focus on the people around them and developing those people in order to get you through those changes. So thank you for those insights. I encourage everyone to reach out to Jay. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week.